Hey everybody, my name is Koli Wadja. I am the Director of Women's Ministry at Antioch Community Church in Northeast Minneapolis, and I want to bring you a word of encouragement today from the book of 1 Peter. I started to read this book this morning, and I got stuck on the first two verses. And so I wanted to talk to you about the first two. So often in these letters in the New Testament, we skip over the introduction. It's like the envelope of a letter. And have you ever thrown away an envelope that you realized later that you actually needed? I've done that multiple times, whether it's wedding invites, where I didn't know until after I threw it away if this was just for me or for me and guest, or if kids were invited or something. Or one time I threw away an envelope that had contact info on it that I had no other way of getting, and I still have not reached out to that person since because I lost the envelope. So when we overlook these greetings in these letters in the New Testament, we can really miss a lot. So let's start in 1 Peter chapter 1. I want to read verses 1 and 2. Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to those who are elect exiles in the dispersion in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia, according to the foreknowledge of God, the Father, in the sanctification of the Spirit, for obedience to Jesus Christ and for the sprinkling with his blood, may grace and peace be multiplied to you. Now this could just be really superfluous and unnecessary of Peter to put in all of this stuff before he gets into like the meat, so to speak, of his letter. But I think everything he says here is really important. One way that can be really helpful is to think about the W's, the who, where, what, why, how. And so in this case, if we look at that, you see the who's writing is Peter. To whom is he writing? To the elect exiles of the dispersion. Now, that also tells us a little bit about the where. The dispersion was an idea of originally the Jewish people being spread out all over the world after the Babylonian exile because they never all fully got back to Jerusalem. But here Peter is using it in an even greater sense for Jewish and Gentile, non-Jewish believers in Jesus who are spread out throughout the world. And here he highlights several regions that are now kind of in modern day Turkey, but it's really for believers in the entire world. And he identifies them as elect exiles. And it is according to the foreknowledge of God the Father. In the sanctification of the Spirit, that's the how. The Spirit does his sanctifying work in us and makes us more and more into the image of God who is our Father. And it's for something. This is the why. For obedience to Jesus Christ and for sprinkling with his blood, which is a reference to his crucifixion and how his sacrifice covers us. And then finally he ends with the what. May grace and peace be multiplied to you. That's what he wants for us. And if you look at this just from the circumstances, I think this desire that Peter has in verse 2, that grace and peace would be multiplied, that could seem like a really frustrating desire. Because if you just look at the circumstance, and a listener may say, hey, I'm in exile. I'm not in my home. I'm not where I'm supposed to be. How can I possibly have grace and peace in this moment? But I think Peter answers that in all of the other things he says. Because if you don't just look at circumstances, but if you look to God, instead of all of those things you see of what you don't have, instead you see an all-powerful God who is my Father. And you see that his Spirit is refining and ridding me of the things that I don't need in the first place. And I get to look more and more like my Father as time goes on, as his sanctifying work continues. I also see that he has a purpose and a plan for me. All of this, even the dispersion, is in accordance with the foreknowledge of God. God knows what he's doing, and he has a plan in it. Well, if I am covered in all of these ways, and if I'm covered by the sprinkling of his blood, if God has a purpose for me and I get to call him Father, how can I not have grace and peace? And I cannot just have it, but I can have it in ever-increasing measure. What does he say? May grace and peace be multiplied to you. Folks, the grace and peace that we have, whatever grace we experience, whatever peace we feel, it is not based on our circumstance. It's based on our identity in who we are. It's based on the fact that God the Father has loved us first, and he is the one who is sanctifying us and covering us with the blood of Jesus. And because of that, we can have immeasurable amounts of grace and peace. So no matter what your circumstances look like today, the world can be really scary. And maybe you feel like an exile right now, even just in circumstantial, the state of your life feels like you're in exile from your former life before all the craziness of these days. I pray that you would not just look at circumstances, but that you would turn and look to God and to see what he has to say about who you are, about what you're called to right now, and about what he has for you. So for you and for me, may grace and peace be multiplied to you. God bless.